I'm Meath Poultney, and I'm here to tell you that you're listening to the Decarbonisation Dialogue, a podcast from Salix.
Welcome to Delivering on Climate Change, our collective challenge. Welcome to the Decarbonisation Dialogue. I am Hannah Walker, and I believe that the best way to communicate a message is by being passionate about what you are talking about. Through that passion, I believe you take people with you and create action using your influence to make change and make a difference. Our task today is to get all of us to net zero. My guest today is Jenni Brooks. Jenni is a lead at Climate Action Leeds, which is working for a zero-carbon, nature-friendly, socially just Leeds by the 2030s. This is an ambitious lottery-funded project linking up local and citywide communities to act, plan and build a movement of action and change. Jenni is well versed in donut methodologies and has been pivotal in setting up the Leeds Donut Coalition and working with the University of Leeds around this project. I can't wait to hear more, Jenni. So thank you very much for joining us today on the Decarbonisation Dialogue.
Oh, thank you so much for inviting me on.
Now, Jenni, can you tell us a little bit about your own background and how you've developed your life and your career up to this point? And I'd love to know if you've always been interested in all things sustainable and energy and caring for the community. But how did it all start for you?
Yeah, so I grew up in a political family. My mum was a teacher and really a passionate educationalist, and my dad was an anti-apartheid campaigner and was a political prisoner in South Africa. So we were always out at demonstrations, hosting meetings and visitors in our house. So I had a deep sense of the injustice in the world, but also the drive to be part of something better, and knowing that starts at home and starts in your community, starts with people in places with lived experience. So I went on to study philosophy and politics at Glasgow University, and I was really inspired by the energy of devolution. So my first job was in the Scottish Government, and I did stints in the First Minister's Policy Unit and as a policy advisor on civic participation. And participation and deep democracy, giving people voice and that voice being valued and heard and empowered are really my passions. And I've always really saw the places that can make the most difference. So at that point, I wanted to work in a more hands-on way. So I moved out of government into a range of community settings. So I was a youth worker, I taught literacy in a homeless charity and in psychiatric and dementia wards, and did some bits of policy and research consultancy alongside that. I'm also quite creative. So at this point, I took a creative writing master's and was doing publishing and performing in bits and pieces and using creative practice all over Edinburgh. Then I had a break and had my children. We moved down to West Yorkshire, and I found that quite an isolating experience, moving from one nation to another. Having children, you're very isolated and atomised. And so I became involved with my local community centre, and I always sort of throw myself into things. So I ended up on the trustee board, and then I became chair of the trustees about a week before COVID hit. So suddenly I was plunged into, we had to close our doors, we had to pivot our business model, we had to make staff redundant, do strategic reviews. So it was really full on, but it was incredibly, I learned a huge amount from having that position. And by the time I left my tenure there, we'd secured a community asset transfer. We'd done secured the funding for a large-scale renovation of the building. We'd built some key partnerships and got it onto a much firmer footing going forward. So that kind of leads me to my current role, which is also place-based. So I've always thought that change happens both at strategic and policy levels as well as on the ground. And I kind of find myself moving in the space between the two. So as engagement lead and donut economics lead at Climate Action Leeds, it's a really good fit because I sit in the city movement building team, which is at the centre of this distributed partnership programme that has community hubs in 8 different neighbourhoods across Leeds in really diverse areas. And we have 7 transition partners across things like energy, housing, food, and we also try to centre climate justice in this. And my role is really about trying to connect, grow, amplify and scale up the change that's going on in all those different parts of the programme.
Okay, so it's really interesting. It's fascinating to hear you talk about how you grew up and that your parents were very active, and you feel very passionately about giving people a voice and putting people and getting that voice to the table and to the top table to to as many people as possible. And that's what we're trying to do, actually, with the Decarbonisation Dialogue podcast. We want to get all voices to this table because there are so many aspects when we talk about climate change, climate crisis, what's happening to our planet. That's absolutely fascinating to hear you talk about where that comes from and that injustice and knowing that things can be better, but not just better for one, but better for all. So that's fascinating. Now, I've got some statistics, so you have to bear with me for a moment. My second question here is, our carbon emissions. I know that you've been part of this work, actually, and you've been part of looking at carbon emissions in Leeds. And it was, I think I found these statistics. Apparently, in Leeds, each person is currently responsible for 9.3 tonnes of carbon emissions per year, which is almost 6 times more than the safe limit. This was published in a report, The Leeds City Portrait, which was produced by a team of researchers and practitioners from Climate Action Leeds and the University of Leeds. It also showed, and we're coming back to what you feel obviously very passionate about and what you're working on, it showed serious inequality, with the highest 20% of earners in Leeds responsible for nearly 4 times as many carbon emissions as the lowest 20% of earners. And tell me about that. How does that kind of research inspire you? And I'm going to say them again. It showed that with the highest 20% of earners in Leeds responsible for nearly 4 times as many carbon emissions as the lowest 20%, which could probably be reflected worldwide, although I'm not an expert on this.
Yeah, I was part of that team of researchers, and we thought it was really important to provide an evidence base for the things that a lot of us know intuitively or have a sense of, but can't get a grip on in our day-to-day lives. But we know things like greater inequality leads to greater consumption, that consumption patterns are very different across different demographics and social backgrounds and so on. We know that different individuals have different impacts, and we know that what we do here has real repercussions all over the world. And the report really was aiming to highlight those things. So I think the complexity of global production and markets makes a lot of climate justice issues invisible, and social justice kind of gets sort of hived off as a separate issue, but they're so interconnected. You can't deal with one without dealing with another. So, for example, the inequality in life expectations on people who are living a couple of miles away from each other. It's a real scandal. And I think what we try to do at Climate Action Leeds is bring that into a holistic framing.
Tell me about what the donut model means and how you apply that in Leeds, and then obviously how that can be applied in other cities, because Leeds you would indicate that you could apply it probably in any city.
Yeah, you absolutely can, and people have applied it in lots of different places globally around the world, and in lots of different ways. It's a really flexible framework. So just to summarise what donut economics is, so Kate Raworth set it out in her book. You imagine a ring donut with parallel rings, and the outer one is the planetary limits, and this is set by scientists, and it's things like emissions, effect on oceans, the air, and so on. And so that's the planetary boundaries, the limitations of the natural world that we need to live in order for Earth systems to function properly. Then you've got the inner ring, which we call the social foundation. And the idea there is that it's the foundation of rights and standards that everybody has the right to be able to expect. So that's based on the Sustainable Development Goals and there are critiques of those, but they form a good kind of gauge of, so there's political voice, equality, housing, education, fundamental rights of human life. So between these two rings is a safe and thriving place for humanity, and that's where we should be aiming to be. But there's not a single place in the world that currently is within the safe and just space for humanity. Different places either overshoot massively or that people fall through the foundation. So it's trying to bring that overshoot down of the planetary boundaries and that social foundation up, and to see those as a holistic framing. So we're not just pitching a sort of a solution that's fantastic for the environment, but inadvertently causes great harm through child labour, forced labour, extracted minerals, and so on. So it's got to, it kind of engages with complexity, but also it's quite a simple idea for people to get their heads around. So I've worked with it in boardrooms and in playgrounds and everything in between. And in Leeds, how we look at that is in our different community hubs, there are very different issues. Wealthier areas have greater emissions, but you can't sort of just go in and impose one-size-fits-all solutions. You got to work in a community development way that really understands what's going on for people there and what change they're drawn to and what's within their resources and capabilities.
You say it's quite simple. You've applied this in playgrounds and the boardroom. Now, you have also talked about you having done a master's in creative writing. Now, that leads us to communication. So how do you communicate this? Because this is about creating a sustainable future, and so everyone can thrive. So a whole. How are you communicating that for example, to the lowest 20% of earners? Because when we talk about climate change and when we talk about sustainable living, and we've interviewed quite a few people on the podcast, from business leaders to people working in the charity sector, and addressing climate change and addressing those solutions is not cheap, is it? It's not cheap. So how do you communicate to people, to that 20% of the lowest earners, that this is something that is in everybody's interest and that we can all play a part and impact some change?
Yeah, I mean, so we have a group called the Leeds Donut Coalition, and it's people who are trying to work with these ideas and not shy away from the complexity that it brings up. And so in order to sort of explore and honour that and people's lived experiences, we try and platform a plurality of solutions. So we're currently running a series of events called Many Yeses, which, rather than a kind of didactic one-size-fits-all approach, invites really playful and expansive ways to think about change and action, both individually and collectively. I mean, this is part of my job I really enjoy, because I've made a couple of films, short illustrated films. And we recently did one. We wanted to take a kind of an everyday issue and explore it through a donut framing, showing that there's global and social issues, but then bring it back to a real kind of sense of what are the next practical steps that a range of different people could take. So I think sometimes in this space it can feel a little bit judgy or exclusive. Climate solutions or climate steps are for a certain type of person, and if you're not holier than thou, then you can't access it, and that's really divisive and doesn't understand the complex nature of people's lives. So in the Many Yeses, we're really trying to lean into what actually speaks to different people. So why don't people just use public transport or fly less, or not buy plastic? But it's really hard to not buy plastic. When I was a mum with small children, I nearly killed myself trying to live a plastic-free life because I couldn't buy anything without plastic, and I didn't have the money to kind of access the stuff that kind of was being sold to me as a lifestyle choice. So we can't bracket all of this action that needs to happen and the massive change that needs to happen as a lifestyle choice. We need to really push it back, push it higher up and look at the systems underlying those things. You know, if you are a woman with care responsibilities with children, maybe you've got a hidden disability, maybe you've experienced fear or hatred in the streets, then is the transport system supporting you? Is the fare structure enabling you? So there are all sorts of things going on. Same with flights. There are lots of different reasons people take flights. Like, you know, some businesses, it's built into their business model, so they need to redesign their business model. But if you're from a diaspora community and you're supporting people back home, then that's a different need. So it's kind of looking at people as in their whole being. So this film we did about fashion, we interviewed lots of experts with lived experience and some people from the university and in different sustainable businesses and things. And we tried to kind of, in a very simple way, it's only 3 or 4 minutes long, suggest lots of different potential solutions, you know. So you could just scrape food off your clothes a bit more rather than put it through the wash, or put it on the line rather than in the dryer. But if you're not able to do that, maybe campaigning for legislative change is more your thing, or hiring a garment if charity shops aren't something that you're comfortable with. So it's kind of just saying, let's take each everyday thing and really explore it, expand it, and then people can find the energy that speaks to them and that works for them.
Do you think there's a danger that when it comes to climate change as well? I mean, you're doing a lot of very positive work. It's very proactive. There's a lot of communication going on. But do you think generally when you're talking about the big climate picture that people are starting to think actually because of how difficult it is to lead that sustainable lifestyle, which we know is a good thing to be doing, but actually someone else needs to be sorting it out. So either government needs to be sorting this out or business needs to be sorting out. But you and me, we just leave it to somebody else?
I'm not sure that that's actually true, and we need to really keep pushing it back against that narrative. The vast majority of people are worried about climate change. They believe in it and they do want to do something. But also, you know, what you're just talking about, the overwhelm, the confusion, the anxiety, the poverty, the struggle are really real for lots of people. To an extent, it is for government to sort out. You know, there's a kind of, I like to see, so I sit in a movement building team, and using a kind of movement building approach is really helpful because I like to use the analogy of a river. So there's lots of different parts of that river that come together and forge that change that's needed. And it's growing in strength throughout its course. But throughout the course of that movement building, you've got different tributaries that are coming together, and you've got water that really moves fast and creates lots of turbulence and energy. And then you've got water that moves really slowly and at a different pace. And I kind of think there's a place for everything and all things that are moving towards that point. So you could be like a little fiery pebble bashing against the sides of the river. But if that's not for you, then there's the kind of legislative change and there's bigger picture stuff. But that's not to say that anything we do as individuals doesn't have its value, because it absolutely does.
I'm a firm believer that actually action does start at grassroots, because those are the people kind of leading it. Yes, you can have government, you can have legislation, but it needs to start at the passion and the drive needs to start at grassroots. Can you tell us a little bit about what you've learned from the power of community action in your experience at Leeds?
Well, it's hard to sum that up, and communities are as varied as individuals are. But essentially, there's a lot of passion, goodwill, energy, commitment, resilience, self-organising. But there are also real challenges. They've been really hollowed out in terms of resources, in confidence. Like I mentioned at the beginning, the sort of atomization and individualization of the way we live at the moment make make it really hard for people. And I think when you're lonely and isolated, then the easiest choices are the ones that aren't really supporting sustainability and, long-term positivity. The classic donut model can feel a bit like a deficit model. Mm-hmm. We did the report, and it shows that, unsurprisingly, Leeds is overshooting or falling short on all sorts of fronts. But when you take that into communities, that can feel that's quite a difficult conversation. That feels like a negative, it feels like a deficit. And actually, you look at communities and go, there's abundance here. There's energy and individual people and volunteers and workers who are really making a difference, working hands-on day and night to make a change. And I think we just really need to learn to lean into and trust local assets, be it people, buildings, parks, spaces, and also trust communities to know what their local aspirations are and to make them happen. But I think what tends to happen is that power and money is always centralizing. It moves away from them, and we need to be pushing it back in and trusting people in real ways, like participatory budgeting, devolved decision making, so that it's not just a sort of tokenistic thing. I mean, I work in the voluntary sector. Funding is on a shoestring, or it's project based, so people learn loads, and then their funding goes and the people go, and it's dropped, and then the next shiny thing comes along, but you've got to revive all of that stuff again. So there's there's real structural and institutional issues that make it difficult. But I think despite that, communities are really where the action happens and where change mobilises from.
And what next for the work at Leeds? Where does this model go?
Interesting question. So we've got 3 months left pretty much of the National Lottery funding for this programme. We're currently trying to fundraise for it. So we've got our city centre space called Imagine Leeds, which has been a phenomenal, impactful space. Physical spaces can't be underestimated in bringing together a community, connecting people, enabling people to learn, share, connect, mobilise, empower. Also have difficult conversations. You need safe spaces. There's different parts of the work that we're seeking funding for. So we're also looking at sort of trying to grow and keep the network in Leeds and expand it across West Yorkshire, in Bradford and other places. I would love to spin off Leeds Donut into a sort of think, do tank that can pilot and learn from some of the ideas that whose time has come, like donut economics. And then in the communities, as you'd expect, really, different areas had different experiences of having Climate Action Leeds hubs. So some will keep going in that form, some will change forms. In some places, the hub won't remain, but there's been a lot of connecting and partnership work enabled by that injection of funding. So it's a really mixed picture.
I was going to ask you whether you're an optimist or a pessimist, but when you use words like Imagine Leeds and the Many Yeses campaign, and then you're talking about the think do tank, you're obviously an optimist. But where next for you and your career, Jenni? You've talked about the project, but what about you? What would you like to do, bearing in mind your creative and campaigning background?
I don't know. I would really like to keep the work going in some form locally, because place-based solutions are really important. But I also really believe in the power of ideas. And I think we need to grow the public realm, the public space. And I am an optimist. You have to be an optimist. But I think the rise of populism and extremism and the breakdown of trust and corrosion of truth-telling really worry me. So I do kind of feel drawn back to the need for democratic revival. Institutions, systems and processes have broken down essentially in this country. I think we need to really overhaul a lot of that, make it fit for the 21st century. And those building blocks of a good and thriving society, I think, are the kind of foundations to addressing a lot of the other problems. Because, you know, if you have a healthy and functioning democracy and you get that right, then social cohesion, care and trust for ourselves and for each other and for the natural world and the bigger, you know, that's how you create the space and the roots for that stuff. So I'm kind of drawn to getting stuck into democracy.
I am really looking forward to seeing. I'm really looking forward to seeing what you do next, Jenny. Because
I do also have a novel that I'm trying to write.
Right. Okay. So you're working. So I'm so looking forward to this next chapter, and you are going to have to obviously come back onto our podcast, because I love the way you talk about that trust and truth telling, and of course this democratic revival that you speak about, because that is the bedrock, obviously, isn't it? And I think there's a lot of deep thinking for all of us around that, and of course climate change and looking to the future and remaining positive, you know, about it as well, and understanding that change can come from grassroots level. So it's been absolutely fantastic to have you on our podcast, Jenny, today. There can be no doubt that climate change is the biggest challenge of our time. Today, we must reduce greenhouse gas emissions to slow global warming. Today, we must act for tomorrow, adjusting our lifestyles to current and future impacts of climate change. Today, we must use our collective wisdom to deliver on our climate commitments. Today, we work for tomorrow's world. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast channels, and we'd love to know what you think. Email us at podcast@salixfinance.co.uk. Thank you very much. And thank you very much to Jenni Brooks for coming on the Decarbonisation Dialogue today. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Hannah. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you.
I'm Kevin Holland, and I'm here to tell you that you've been listening to the Decarbonisation Dialogue, a podcast from Salix. For more information about our work and to find more content, please visit salixfinance.co.uk/podcasts.